We really need to let the government know that they're backing the wrong horse. And I think they've seen that, Peter. You know, the ALP moved to the right and tried to get that Christian vote. This was a policy of Rudd's, and Julia carried it on with the National School Chaplaincy Program and money for Mary MacKillop and for the Catholic World Youth Day. So there's been this real pitch to the Christians. But while they did that, look what happened at the election. All the people on the left bled to the Greens. And now we've got a hung parliament. So, you know, we really need to push this with the government and say, you know, you might be making up votes here, but you're losing them over here.
And you can see this, there's a certain language creeping in now to the debate about religion, which is getting a bit heated and a bit defensive and a bit reactionary on parts of, I think, organised religion. I mean, certain ones that stick in my head, people often talk about, religious people will talk about the secular agenda, as if that's a bad thing, you know, as if the agenda that we can all believe whatever we want to, as long as we don't make it a state policy and no one's mandated to believe something they don't want to. That's the secularist agenda. And to say that that's it's being portrayed as an evil thing, to say that family values are being attacked. Who's attacking family values? Is anyone? Even if you say, you know, if you support gay marriage, why is that in some sense an attack against the modern family? Who are we? You know, we watching families go down the street and go, "Hey, modern family, let's get in there." I mean, nobody's attacking family values. There's these nonsense statements that come out. I even heard Aspinall speak recently, and he spoke about the atheist. Now imagine if we'd said the Jew or something like that. I thought there was an appalling use of language, but you know that passes unchallenged.
And they forget that secularism wasn't devised by atheists. Secularism was devised in the United States to protect denominations from each other. It was there to protect Christians from Christians. You know, there wasn't any sense that it was there to teach secular humanism or to give atheists power. And you know, while atheists certainly support a secular state, it's not because we want to impose atheism on everyone.
No, that's right. So yes, an interesting and refreshing take on Australia's true history when it comes to religion and atheism, which is possibly different to what most people imagine to be true.
So,
Okay.
Peter, can you tell us a little, because Annette suggested there's far more about you that we should know. You tell us a bit about yourself.
Oh, gosh.
And if you miss anything, I've got notes.
I don't know what makes for good public discourse in that arena. No, look, just faster to say that, look, I'm very interested in how people understand issues. That's a big thing for me. Not surprisingly, coming from an educational background, I've taught for about 20 years. I'm actually, that was out of date, my information. As of a couple of weeks ago, I'm no longer with the Queensland Academy for Science, Maths and Technology. I now moved over to the University of Queensland and a little bit of casual teaching, but for the main reason to work on my PhD, which is about how people come to understand and take positions on various issues. Their own sort of epistemology, if you like, in philosophical language, you know, why they wish to believe certain things. And what I find really important in anything that we talk about publicly, whether it's atheism or climate change or any political issue, is the use of language and what people understand when they say particular terms. For example, I used to put my underwear outside my jeans, put my cape on and go and fight at night on the internet about creation science. And
I enjoyed that.
Yes, that's good fun. But you know, and people say to me, "Oh, do you believe in evolution?" And I think, well, no, of course not. I don't believe in evolution. I have come to accept its validity given the nature of the evidence presented to me. To use the word belief in evolution in the same context in which we would talk about belief in a God is disingenuous at best. So, you know, and as soon as you have that type of language going unchallenged, we lose the point at issue. We lose what we're talking about. So I think there's a lot in the debate that we just muddy waters in the language that we use, and we can never tease apart what we're actually trying to say. So that's my my philosophical background, if you like, and why I come to these debates with an interest in education and philosophy and the critical thinking skills that you can learn through philosophy. I think that's probably all I'll say about my background.
So your chapter in the Australian Book of Atheism is called Theology is Not Philosophy. And I think for most people who are worried about paying their mortgage, feeding their kids, getting their kids to do the homework and mowing the lawn, the question would be, who cares?
Well, hopefully nobody. That's the best of all possible worlds. I draw an analogy that I think is pretty tight. You can be the judge of that. But the distinction between theology and philosophy is very similar in my mind to the distinction between creation science and science. Now, imagine trying to teach somebody how science works, the nature of science, by teaching them creation science. Okay, we're going to start off with the fact that the Earth is 6,000-ish years old, that there was a flood, that God created animals as they are today. Right, now let's go and explore the world and see what we find out. Now, if every finding that you have must be bent towards that end, you're not going to learn how science works. You're not going to be driven by evidence. And it's the same thing for me with theology and philosophy. If you teach someone theology, you're outlining what their conclusions are to start with. Yeah, and you don't give them the intellectual space in which to play. Now, people often talk to me about the great thinkers like Thomas Aquinas and Augustine, and say these were great thinkers and they were great thinkers, terrific thinkers. But I tell you what, the biggest stone they had around their necks was their theology too. I mean, they shone when they were doing philosophy, because there are many theologians who do philosophy. But they move between theology and philosophy like moving between different board games. There's different rules over here, we'll play this way, now we'll go over here and do this. But if you conflate the two, that's when some problems occur. But the question is really, well, why would anyone care about that? Well, because you don't want creation science taught in school, effectively, as an educational tool. And I make the same claim. I don't want theology taught in schools as an educational tool, because it doesn't do a very good job. It's not significant to everybody. However, having said that, I also want to promote the idea of philosophy as a tool for critical thinking. Now, what do most people think of when they think of philosophy? And here's my point. They think maybe some vague hand-waving fuzzy notions. A recent principal of mine, in trying to help me get my courses promoted, said, "Ever wonder about the meaning of life?" And I thought, well, I hardly ever think about the meaning of life in a philosophical context. Not why we do philosophy. That's not the point. The point in the Western tradition, mostly philosophy is a very cool analytical tool for examining ideas, and that's what we should be promoting. So when I go into schools and say we need to teach philosophy, people think sometimes I mean a theological perspective on life. What is the meaning of life, and how do we talk about it, and we respect everyone's opinions. But one of the great joys for me in teaching critical thinking is sort of, as a teacher, I'm supposed to come out there and support everybody's views and be supportive of whatever you might think. It's usually the first illusion I try and shatter. I say, look, there is a distinction, and this is a thing that I like to talk about. It's a language thing. It's something we need to tease apart, and I use that phrase "tease apart" quite a lot. There is a big difference between respecting somebody as a person and respecting their opinion. Now, I can differ with your opinion without disrespecting you as a person. And I think that's a really important thing to understand, and not everybody does understand that. They think to disagree with your opinion is to disrespect you. I'm sorry, no, you do have a right to my respect, prima facie. But your views do not. They stand and fall on how well you can argue them. They do not stand and fall on the fact that they come from you. And so this is a great thing to tell the students, I think. Because, look, if all views are equal and deserving of equal respect, then all views are worthless. There is no way in which I can do this. I mean, you might take a basic idea like, someone claims there's a teapot in orbit around Pluto, and I think, well, I don't think there is. And they say, well, that's just your opinion, I have my opinion, both opinions are equal. Now, that's a nonsense. No sensible person's going to say there are equal opinions, and yet we do this in other domains. And we say, well, you're not allowed to do that because it offends me if you question my views. And it's very interesting to wonder where in our society being offended, not being offended, has become a right. Who says you can't be offended? Sorry, but you can be. God knows I get offended a lot. And I don't go up to someone and say, how dare you, you've offended me. It's irrelevant if you're talking about the views. You've got to make the disconnect. Because the bottom line is I won't engage in argumentation with somebody unless I respect them. What's the point otherwise? If I think, I will listen to you if I think there's a chance I can change my mind. Or unless you ask me to expand my view on something. But otherwise, why would I waste my time? Why would you waste your time? So there has to be a basic element of respect to engage in argument to start with. And if that's not there, well, we just don't go ahead of it. So it's sort of shattering those illusions. That's why I think that it's important to appreciate that when someone says philosophy, they're not talking about fuzziness and theology, which just loves to muddy the waters of what they're trying to say.
So, Peter, what you're talking about with philosophy is you're talking more about teaching kids about how to think, critical thinking, examining their beliefs. I think that you said one of the most wonderful parts in your class is when you say to the kids that if you don't know why you believe in something, you need to think about why you believe it. But
I think I actually said in the book you have no business believing it, which is probably a bit harsh. But
now,
yeah.
but I wonder, are you concerned at all that may challenge the religious beliefs of the children? So that do you feel that you're doing something in the class that is contrary to the parents' wishes, perhaps?
Well, look, if the parents, and this is a real issue. In terms of there are perceptions from parents, but it's a false issue, I think, in other ways. If you don't want children to think critically, don't send them to school, or go and send them to your own schools that you set up for that purpose of not telling them everything. Does that mean that we have blanket truths about life, the universe and everything? Not necessarily. But look, the essence of a critical thinking education is that people can think for themselves. Now, I don't know what would inspire someone to not want that. I mean, I do recall an elderly relation telling me first off, when my kids were asking me, and they're this high, why does it rain? And I start talking about, does God make it rain? And I said, well, basically it's this, it's precipitation, blah, blah, blah. And they said to me, oh, why don't you just not go and say that? Why don't you let it go just for a few years until they get the idea of God, and then they can make up their own mind? And I thought, hang on, we indoctrinate them first in the idea and then make up their own mind? I think that's an absolute nonsense. So yes, it does cause some friction with parents, but I never say to the kids, I'm an atheist and you should be too. We simply say, look, you need to examine and justify what you think and believe. And I've always said to the kids, I really don't care what you believe, I honestly don't, but I'm passionately interested in why you believe it. I think that's the critical thing. I'm never going to get everyone to think the way I do, thank God. But the...
Would you care to rephrase that?
No, I'd thank anyone for that, that's fine. Any godlike object. But I do want them all to think for themselves. That's absolutely critical. If a parent complains that their child has reached a conclusion based on what they've learned as thinking skills, that's their problem.